So
Yeah.
keep going.
I can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Wait, our class is
Digital human.
Oh shit,
contemporary
guys.
African history.
Yeah.
And
Well, don't need the exact title.
Yeah,
Okay.
just throw info. Okay.
We're looking at contemporary African
I
history.
don't think
and
we're all in this screen, by the way.
You don't think so?
Well, we
Okay.
can
Okay,
figure
can
that
I
out.
send it?
Send what?
I've been typing for
Yeah,
like 5
yeah.
minutes. Great. I'll call now. Okay. Oh god. I really hate interviews.
So where are the questions? Wait, do you need the access to the questions? Can everybody see this?
I have it on top.
I have it on my phone. Ready?
On your phone? She can't.
Too late.
There we go. Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Fine.
So, I'm Alexander.
I'm Justine.
And I'm Israel.
And we're calling to you
Okay.
from Pomona College. And thank you so much for talking with us today.
You're welcome. I didn't put the vid because it takes up so much internet and the connection is not always so great. But I can put it on for a minute.
Okay.
So you actually have a face behind the voice.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so there I am.
Hello.
Great to meet you.
Nice to meet
So
you
you
too.
said Israel. I'm working backwards.
Yes.
Justine
Yes.
and
Alexander.
Alexander. Okay, pleased to meet you all.
Thank you.
So if the reception gets a bit fuzzy, we'll just go back to just voice
Okay.
because
Cool.
sometimes it's easier that way.
Okay.
Cool. Yes.
Yep.
Just to give you some background again about what we're doing. So we are in a contemporary African history course this semester, and our final project is to take aspects of what we're learning and different themes and create a digital humanities project. So we're going to be doing a website that's going to be looking at the built environment of Dar es Salaam and how it has changed through different forces and external factors throughout contemporary history, and also looking at what is the future of that built environment based off of interviewing maybe some architects, looking at some more research. But we would love to get, again, your perspective on, the historic preservation side, because that's what your organization does. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Just to get some logistics out of the way, we wanted to ask, are you okay with this being recorded so that we can refer back to this for notes, or perhaps even
Absolutely.
take snippets of it for
Absolutely.
our website? Okay, thank you so much. Yay. And
You're welcome. My pleasure.
My second question was, do you have any time limitations, just so that we are aware as the interview goes? Like any...
Not necessarily. It is the end of my day, so
Right.
I'm not, bright and lucky. That's
Okay.
the only thing.
Okay.
It's actually 5 o'clock in Dar, so it's around the end of the day for me. I know for you it's bright and early and you're all fresh. So do excuse me if I get a little laggy
Okay,
in my speech, but no limitations. I'm happy to provide and help whatever information you may need.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So yeah, I guess one of our questions was that I read that DARCH sort of acts as like a think tank and like also doing some research and like projects. Like, are there any projects you're doing right now that you'd be like comfortable sharing with us, or like that you have any information?
Oh, you're breaking up a bit.
I'm sorry. Are there any projects that you're working on currently that you'd be comfortable sharing with us?
I'll just give you a little background again. I'm sure you've read most of it. It is a think tank of sorts,
yes,
because the initiators really all felt there was a specific role that each partner or each member needed to play. The architects, of course, are architects, so they obviously guide the way in which the city is developing in terms of its building structure. And then the two universities, of course, came in because there was a need to kind of expand the knowledge base and the practical base of the information that was being taught at universities. So, in essence, the local university, which is the RD University, is an architectural university. Most of the courses that they teach are on architecture, whether it's landscape architecture or the different fields. I'm not an architect, so I'm definitely not an authority on studies in architecture. And then, so they felt that because the conservation studies were not yet heavily sort of embedded in the curriculum of the university, bringing in the University of the TU Berlin University in Germany, which was a little bit more ingrained in teaching these courses, was going to be beneficial. So, of course, that later sort of morphed into a student exchange program that was within the period of the EU funding. Because for DARCH to actually see the light of day, as much as you had the institutions getting together and recognizing the need for an intervention in terms of saving and promoting architectural heritage, in order to launch the activities in the program and the project, they needed funding. And luckily, at that time, the EU had made a call for proposals to fund cultural initiatives. Now, they were luckily very broad in the projects they were willing to fund, and the idea of adding the aspect of conservation, preservation, restoration, saving of architectural heritage in Dar es Salaam to begin with somehow still fell into that bracket, and they were able to get a grant to actually launch the project. But at the same time, DARCH was being launched as a company, so it was both a non-profit company and project. Of course, the project period is now finished. We are now operating as a non-profit company. And then the third sort of partner was the German Cultural Institute, because, of course, you know, when you're looking at issues of heritage, you can't kind of put everything in a neat kind of category and bucket. Everything kind of somehow overlaps. You're talking about structures, you're talking about spaces, you're talking about people, you're talking about, you know, their way of life, their clothes, the food they eat. So the cultural aspect of it needed to have a cultural institution, or rather an institution that could bring in that aspect of the dynamics of what DARCH wanted to do. And of course, all that was to be done through research, documentation, engaging with the community, engaging with the different sort of stakeholders, government level to private institutions to public institutions, just to get, you know, kind of somehow have as many sort of involved in this process as possible. So within the first 3 months of DARCH, of course, it was a lot of kind of setting up, registering the company, setting up the institution, hiring staff, such as myself. And then one of the main kind of projects that needed to be done was to do restoration work on this particular building, the Old Boma, which is the oldest building in Dar es Salaam, sort of documented building in Dar es Salaam, which had different uses through time. It was first built by the Sultan of Zanzibar. Later, it was bought by the Germans when they came in as colonialists, and then the British, and then it was handed over to the Tanzanian government, right up to when DARCH came into an agreement with the Dar es Salaam City Council, who currently own the building, to kind of allow us to be able to realize the mission and vision of DARCH in general. So one thing was to actually do restoration work on the building so that it's a tangible result that can be seen, that can be explained, that can be broken down architectural wise. So with architecture students, this is a showpiece that they can come and actually see restoration work on an actual building. That was done with the standards that the policies and guidelines of the standards that are expected. So at the moment, we are now in the phase of actually operating center after it was launched formally in June last year. So it's still a fairly new and young organization. We've had the occasion to have a few public forums where members of the public were invited just to discuss about what they felt about the heritage, what they felt about the build structure in the city, what was happening in terms of the demolitions that had taken place. That was one of the main reasons why DARCH was set up. It's because there was this rampant demolition that was unchecked. And as much as there are departments in the government that are supposed to be kind of the antiquities department in particular, that is supposed to be safeguarding the historical monuments, because they have a list of protected buildings that is gazetted. But it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's still not formalized enough. I mean, we're still not listed in UNESCO, and that's one of the main steps that we need to follow to really make sure that the buildings remain protected. And in terms of definition, when we talk of architectural heritage, we don't just mean buildings. So we are talking about all types of monuments. So it's buildings, it's open spaces, it's statues, and we have a few examples of that. So it's really a wide definition of what architectural heritage is. As much as our name says architectural heritage, but it's a much broader definition than that. So let me stop there for a minute. Wow. I've gone off tangent.
One quick question I had was, with all these different historic preservation projects, is there sort of a positive sort of from the community? Do they are they wanting more buildings, historic buildings, to be preserved, or is there any pushback at all for certain reasons, or what's the overall feel of what DARCH is doing?
Well, I can say, before we were on the scene, there was really nothing like this. Nothing that was either a government initiative, or we were really the very first organization to be doing what we do. So I'd say generally there was a lack of interest, and it could have been based on the lack of information. There was no information, and there wasn't a particular space that people could go and read or get the sort of data they needed. But now, with that being here, I certainly see there is a small shift, a slight shift. It's we don't expect a big change overnight, but definitely we're getting more interest. We are getting more visitors, more Tanzanians, which for me is a very important target group, coming in and actually showing interest and genuinely curious to learn about the history. Because that's the big thing that we accompany the architect. It's really the historical information about the monument. And we have, in the activities that we have right now, we have a permanent exhibition that's there permanently on the history of the city. But on a quarterly basis, we also have temporary exhibitions. And with the temporary exhibition, we try and kind of focus and touch on and look into different aspects of city life, different aspects of the different interests that people would have that's to do with the city. So that is to really try and kind of reach out to the different disciplines, different kind of people who can come to DARCH and feel that they can get information or something concrete out of what we do. At the moment, of course, a lot of of people feel that, well, it's all about architecture and, I'm not an architect and I don't know if it will be of interest to me. We're really trying to draw in everybody. So there's history, there's sociology, there's culture, there's architecture, there is something for everyone. And one of the main drives that we're doing, starting this month, actually later this month, we are now going to go and visit schools. So we're going to actually be touring schools as such. And what we hope to achieve is to at least start introducing the information to the students from primary school students, so we're talking about 10-year-olds upwards, to just having an idea that some of these buildings are not just old. There's history behind it, and it has to do with our identity, it has to do with our history. And if we don't take care of this precious asset today, then it will be there 100 years from now, and that is not right. Besides the possibility of drawing revenue from historical monuments, because you have tourists who are interested. When they arrive in there, they want to see monuments or structures that can really decry the spirit of the city. Now, if we have carbon copies of skyscrapers that you see in New York or that you see in Dubai that are not built to the best standards, we've lost the plot. So the buildings that can show the historical evolution of the city and the different communities that we have a very strong Asian community, and this is the city center. From 300 years ago, even before the Sultan of Zanzibar came to Dar es Salaam, you already had a lot of Indians traveling, during the monsoon winds and trading, because we had raw material that was interesting to them. So they would come, and there was commerce that was taking place. It is a port city, so that was bound to be happening. It is only when the Sultan of Zanzibar, who was originally from Oman, moved to the shores of what came to be known as Dar es Salaam, that's when Dar es Salaam was founded. So they say, but of course there was an existing community in place. The Omani kind of influence, there was a little bit of architecture. This building itself was built by the Zanzibar Sultan for his guests. And there were several brothers who were involved. The brother who was interested in architecture didn't live for very long. After moving to Dar es Salaam, I think he lived for 5 years and died. And his brother who inherited was more interested in the slave trade and decided Bagamoyo, which is a town further inward, was probably more lucrative for him. And then, of course, at the time is when the German colonialists were also landing in Dar es Salaam, and they were obviously completely against the slave trade. So the Sultan of Zanzibar decided to sell off few properties that were existing, and he moved further down from the city to another region more inland. And so with the Germans coming in and deciding to set up a proper administration, they bought the buildings that were existing and built a few more buildings after arriving in Dar es Salaam. So one of the first things they did is actually devise a draft, what do they call it, master plan. So they actually subdivided the city into very specific zones. They had a European zone, which was closer to the shore, and then they had an Asian an Asian was obviously mainly lived in by the indigenous Indians. And then you had the African zone, which was further down. Of course, we're talking about maybe 5-10 kilometers from the shore. We're like 500 meters from the ocean, this building. So I'm talking like 5 kilometers more inward into the city. And this, of course, was based on the fact that they wanted to keep the Africans further out. It was traditional completely. And they devised policies that meant you could only build structures of a certain type, which automatically excluded certain communities. So now when you come to that, you can still kind of clearly see the different types of architecture in the city. And you go into the Indian zone, the structures are very different. For them, it was mainly commercial spaces downstairs and living quarters upstairs. And you still have a lot of buildings that reflect exactly that. Buildings that were built 100 years ago and that are still standing. With the African zone, because a lot of the structures were of, I would say, degradable material, so they used, mud and not bamboo, some bamboo, palm leaves and grass. So they obviously have not survived now. As the prefecture developed, grew, Kariako now, what was known as the African zone, Kariako, is much more built up, and you have more of commercial residential spaces, most of them, going vertically. So that's changed quite a lot. But the Asian zone and the European zone, you can still see remnants, a lot of remnants of the old Dar es Salaam. And for us, this is what we're trying to somehow maintain and keep, some of the historical architectural features that were present then. Long answer.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Yes, of course. So I guess maybe not to be too invasive of your own personal views, but every day when you go through your job, like as you're thinking about this history, about the conflicting views that different people in the city might have, maybe the UN versus local people, or maybe people not wanting to preserve European architecture, for example, maybe if that's an issue, what do you find to be kind of like the thing that you most struggle with every day as you refine DARCH's mission statement or think about what your goals are in your job? Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes absolute sense. At the moment, our biggest supporters are the international community, badly at the moment. They are willing to fund any capabilities of restoration work. And I think there's more appreciation and recognition of the importance of preservation. When I look at the local community, I think there's always been that misunderstanding that the skyscrapers are the way to go. They're the path to development and maybe riches and wealth. So that, I think, combined with the fact that a lot of the older buildings have been left intact, they have not really been cared for very well. They don't look very attractive. And so it somehow translates that newer buildings, more modern looking structures, means we are developing at a better pace or at a more sort of tangible pace than trying to keep the old buildings that, one, are remnants of the colonial past, and they're not necessarily attractive. Now, the outlook, the physical outlook, that can be rectified if the buildings are restored and renovated. We can already deal with that aspect. The issue of the colonial remnants, I'll be honest with you, Tanzanians do not necessarily carry that baggage of saying, I don't want to keep, or I want to see a building that reminds me of the German colonialists. We don't really have that baggage now. I don't know if it's because maybe information has been lost somewhere for most, or we're indifferent. So that is not a challenge. Currently, the laws in Tanzania, individuals, all of the structures that were present after independence, the government issued an order to have all buildings nationalized. And this included people's private homes. So if I owned a home in the 70s, the government took it and said now, and this is during our socialism phase. I think you may have some information about that already. We did follow the socialist kind of way of running the government. Our very first president, Julius Nyerere, kind of lent into that, and we all had to be equal, and there wasn't going to be any excessive wealth. So one way in doing that was to nationalize all property so that it belongs to all of us. There wasn't one single person who had a nice house back to them. Everything was under the custodian of the government. Of course, later, people were giving back their houses. I think it was in the 80s that they did give back private property to individuals. But of course, in the CBD, a lot of structures were either structures that existed after the colonialists left, so they weren't built by the country, so to say. So they remain in the custody of the government, and that is still the case. 70%, 80% of the structures that were standing were under the custodian of the government. That now, and at the moment, it is either through the National Housing Corporation or some government department, like the City Council, like this building is owned by the City Council. So it is really in the hands of the government at the moment to decide what happens to these buildings in reality. Very few buildings that are in the category of buildings that should be protected and should not be demolished are owned by the government. And so I think that is where us as an organization can play a role in advising, encouraging the government to not demolish some of the more valuable buildings, and to probably look at other areas or other buildings that don't have any particular value. Because you have some buildings that are old, but really there is no historical importance or necessarily any sort of architectural uniqueness that would put them in a category where they can be seen as monuments. So our position is, let's be selective on the buildings that you may wish to demolish. And we encourage you to come to us to get information, data, input, advice, moving forward. Because I think if you demolish and then you come to know that, maybe this building could have been saved, then it's too late. Once it's gone, it's gone. So we hope that they can see us in that role. That we are an organization or an organization where they can come to us for advice when it comes to preserving of monuments. And of course, the laws at the moment are very outdated, and these are laws that were formed under the Ministry of Tourism and Natural Resources under the Antiquities Department. When it comes to heritage and conservation, the monuments that are on their list at the moment is only 25 listed monuments, and this includes open spaces, statues, and buildings, it's only 25. And the policy is the monument in question has to be over 100 years old. Now, if Dar es Salaam was only founded 170 years ago, you're really limiting your list. And the list should be growing because the criteria is flexible enough to allow it to grow. But we've confined ourselves to over 100 years old, there are so many buildings that were built in the 30s, in the 40s, in the 60s, right up to the 70s, that really qualify to be on that list. So these are some of the challenges that need to be looked at, and we are gently kind of urging the different departments to kind of seriously look into this. But obviously, we know sometimes there's disparity in agendas, and we don't have any legislative power. So it can be a little bit limiting. But we hope the longer we're here and the more we can get the general community involved and just create as much awareness as possible, then we can also add their voice, to the outcry, and we hope that will make a difference. Plus the fact that we're nurturing soon to be graduating students who will have that mindset, because we're expanding the curriculums to add these important studies of the history and the monuments and heritage and conservation. So I think when we kind of try and change the mindset of the community in that way, then we may see some results sooner rather than later, because obviously we're on the clock all the time. All the buildings are on the clock. If they're not protected, if they're not on the list, they're always in danger of being demolished. It's an immediate danger all the time.
I guess you just mentioned working with students. I was wondering, what else, you have done with that, or kind of what specifically you're hoping to do with students, especially architectural students. If you just have more information on that.
And I guess also with that too, is there an emphasis with either when you're working with students or at that architecture university in Dar es Salaam to sort of bring in more sort of architecture themes or styles originating from the area with maybe the European, I don't know, just is there kind of a melding of the two, or kind of that makes sense.
Okay, well, as I said earlier, each member partner has been given a specific role. With the universities, we have entrusted the architectural university, the local university, to kind of continue on with that function. Of course, we're here to support, to organize workshops, to invite, students, to invite professors who can really help benefit and move the wheel along. As DARCH staff, we're not really equipped to know the areas that would be relevant or of particular interest, or that are very current, because we're not in the academia field as DARCH staff. But RD fulfills that role for us. So that being said, we have gotten a lot of students coming. Some foreign students, even today, I was being interviewed by a student from Guatemala who is doing a master's thesis and is looking at the implications of cultural heritage in urban regeneration. And his case study is the Dar es Salaam CBD. So he's actually attached to the university here, and even his supervisor is from there, but he comes and gets whatever reference material that he needs from us. But the core information of his studies is is being fulfilled by RB. We can give referrals to the different ministries he can go to speak to individuals who can give him more information on whether it's an issue of planning or if he needs more information on any aspect of what it means to these different factors that affect the planning elements of the city. So that's really how we're working. Depending on the particular topic, then it will either be the architects who can come in and provide the consultative information, or if it is in the area of academia, then it's the RD university that we would refer the individual to, depending on the information and the assistance they need. For us, we do walking tours. So we take you around the different monuments in the city and give you the historical background. But if you want a technical breakdown of, either the architectural aspect of it, then we have to call in the architects to give that information, because they're the experts in the partnership.
This is kind of being resourceful of maybe everything you might know. So, are there any specific writers or public speakers as well that you would suggest we look up about any more information about anything you talked about today? Sorry.
I can give you references of sort of the focal persons. So we have a focal person at the University of RV. Who would be able to open up that avenue for you, and then we also have some individuals that I can refer you to, of the architects. It really depends on the particular topic that you want to help you to have them assist you with.
Very cool.
But you're not architects, you're history students.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're history students. Okay, so we're almost in the same boat, because I'm not an architect either. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah. Any more questions? I think we're good. Yeah. Thank you so much for
Thank
taking
you.
time out of your day. We really
It was
appreciate
very
it. Yeah.
helpful.
It was my pleasure. If you have any more questions, please feel free to drop me an email. I'll be happy to help.
Awesome.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Have a good
Yeah.
Have a nice night.
Okay.
day. Bye.
All the best.
Thank
too.
you.
All the
too.
best.
We'll be happy to send you
Okay.
the project.
Yeah, we'll send you the link to the project when it's finished.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That would be a huge help.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right. Good luck. Bye.
I gotta make sure I end this recording right. Hold on. I'll be good. I'm
Start recording your whole class.